This is from your fourth reading, which is the last part of the afterword to Marx's magnum opus, Das Kapital. A few notes on this reading. Where it makes sense, for example, the word receipt meant recipe at that time, I will replace the contemporary word or phrase or translation in place of the original. On occasion, I will add a footnote to explain an esoteric piece of jargon and will do so with this voice. I will leave out things like page numbers and such which can be recovered by reading the text itself but are otherwise not germane to the point of this text. Where Marx quotes another author, I will use a different voice to distinguish. These notes finished, I turn now to this channel's creator, the Mad Adam, as the voice of Karl Marx.
That the method employed in Das Kapital has been little understood is shown by the various conceptions, contradictory one to another, that have been formed of it. Thus the Paris Review Positiviste reproaches me in that, on the one hand, I treat economics metaphysically, and on the other hand, confine myself to the mere critical analysis of actual facts, instead of writing recipes for the cookshops of the future. In answer to the reproach in regard to metaphysics, Professor Sieber has it.
Insofar as it deals with actual theory, the method of Marx is the deductive method of the whole English school, a school whose failings and virtues are common to the best theoretic economists.
N. Bloch, from the Theoreticians of Socialism in Germany. Extract from the Journal of Economists, July and August 1872, makes the discovery that my method is analytic and says, by this work, Mr. Marx ranks among the most eminent analytical minds. German reviews, of course, shriek out at Hegelian sophistics.
This was an erudite way of saying Hegelian bullshit.
The European Messenger of St. Petersburg, in an article dealing exclusively with the method of Das Kapital, finds my method of inquiry severely realistic, but my method of presentation, unfortunately, German dialectical. It says,
at first sight, if the judgment is based on the external form of the presentation of the subject, Marx is the most ideal of ideal philosophers, always in the German, i.e., the bad sense of the word. But in point of fact, he is infinitely more realistic than all his forerunners in the work of economic criticism. He can in no sense be called an idealist.
I cannot answer the writer better than by aid of a few extracts from his own criticism, which may interest some of my readers to whom the Russian original is inaccessible. After a quotation from the preface to my criticism of political economy, where I discuss the materialistic basis of my method, the writer goes on.
Preceding this quote, you should know that the phrase, of moment, was a way of saying especially important.
The one thing which is of moment to Marx is to find the law of the phenomena with whose investigation he is concerned. And not only is that law of moment to him, which governs these phenomena, in so far as they have a definite form and mutual connection within a given historical period. Of still greater moment to him is the law of their variation, of their development, i.e., of their transition from one form into another, from one series of connections into a different one. This law, once discovered, he investigates in detail the effects in which it manifests itself in social life. Consequently, Marx only troubles himself about one thing: to show, by rigid scientific investigation, the necessity of successive determinate orders of social conditions, and to establish, as impartially as possible, the facts that serve him for fundamental starting points. For this it is quite enough if he proves, at the same time, both the necessity of the present order of things, and the necessity of another order into which the first must inevitably pass over, and this all the same, whether men believe or do not believe it, whether they are conscious or unconscious of it. Marx treats the social movement as a process of natural history, governed by laws not only independent of human will, consciousness, and intelligence, but rather, on the contrary, determining that will, consciousness, and intelligence. If in the history of civilization the conscious element plays a part so subordinate, then it is self-evident that a critical inquiry whose subject matter is civilization can, less than anything else, have for its basis any form of, or any result of, consciousness. That is to say, that not the idea, but the material phenomenon alone can serve as its starting point. Such an inquiry will confine itself to the confrontation and the comparison of a fact, not with ideas, but with another fact. For this inquiry, the one thing of moment is that both facts be investigated as accurately as possible, and that they actually form, each with respect to the other, different momenta of an evolution. But most important of all is the rigid analysis of the series of successions, of the sequences and concatenations.
Concatenations here mean interconnections or linkages,
in which the different stages of such an evolution present themselves. But it will be said, the general laws of economic life are one and the same, no matter whether they are applied to the present or the past. This Marx directly denies. According to him, such abstract laws do not exist. On the contrary, in his opinion, every historical period has laws of its own. As soon as society has outlived a given period of development and is passing over from one given stage to another, it begins to be subject also to other laws. In a word, economic life offers us a phenomenon analogous to the history of evolution in other branches of biology. The old economists misunderstood the nature of economic laws when they likened them to the laws of physics and chemistry. A more thorough analysis of phenomena shows that social organisms differ among themselves as fundamentally as plants or animals. Nay, one and the same phenomenon falls under quite different laws in consequence of the different structure of those organisms as a whole, of the variations of their individual organs, of the different conditions in which those organs function, etc. Marx, for example, denies that the law of population is the same at all times and in all places. He asserts, on the contrary, that every stage of development has its own law of population. With the varying degree of development of productive power, social conditions and the laws governing them vary too. Whilst Marx sets himself the task of following and explaining from this point of view the economic system established by the sway of capital, he is only formulating, in a strictly scientific manner, the aim that every accurate investigation into economic life must have. The scientific value of such an inquiry lies in the disclosing of the special laws that regulate the origin, existence, development, death of a given social organism and its replacement by another and higher one. And it is this value that, in point of fact, Marx's book has.
Whilst the writer pictures what he takes to be actually my method, in this striking and, as far as concerns my own application of it, generous way, what else is he picturing but the dialectic method? Of course, the method of presentation must differ in form from that of inquiry. The latter has to appropriate the material in detail, to analyze its different forms of development, to trace out their interconnection. Only after this work is done can the actual movement be adequately described. If this is done successfully, if the life of the subject matter is ideally reflected as in a mirror, then it may appear as if we had before us a mere a priori construction. My dialectic method is not only different from the Hegelian, but is its direct opposite. To Hegel, the life process of the human brain, i.e., the process of thinking, which, under the name of the idea, he even transforms into an independent subject, is the demiurgos.
Demiurgos means something like craftsperson or creator, someone who transforms thought into material.
Of the real world, and the real world is only the external, phenomenal form of the idea. With me, on the contrary, the ideal is nothing else than the material world reflected by the human mind, and translated into forms of thought. The mystifying side of Hegelian dialectic I criticized nearly 30 years ago, at a time when it was still the fashion. But just as I was working at the first volume of Das Kapital, it was the good pleasure of the peevish, arrogant, mediocre epigones,
Lackeys, inferior wannabes.
Dochner, Düring and others, who now talk large in cultured Germany, to treat Hegel in same way as the brave Moses Mendelssohn, in Lessing's time, treated Spinoza, i.e. as a dead dog. I therefore openly avowed myself the pupil of that mighty thinker, and even here and there, in the chapter on the theory of value, coquetted with the modes of expression peculiar to him. The mystification which dialectic suffers in Hegel's hands by no means prevents him from being the first to present its general form of working in a comprehensive and conscious manner. With him it is standing on its head. It must be turned right side up again, if you would discover the rational kernel within the mystical shell. In its mystified form, dialectic became the fashion in Germany, because it seemed to transfigure and to glorify the existing state of things. In its rational form it is a scandal and abomination to bourgeoisdom and its doctrinaire professors, because it includes in its comprehension an affirmative recognition of the existing state of things, at the same time also, the recognition of the negation of that state, of its inevitable breaking up, because it regards every historically developed social form as in fluid movement, and therefore takes into account its transient nature not less than its momentary existence, because it lets nothing impose upon it, and is in its essence critical and revolutionary. The contradictions inherent in the movement of capitalist society impress themselves upon the practical bourgeois most strikingly in the changes of the periodic cycle through which modern industry runs, and whose crowning point is the universal crisis. That crisis is once again approaching, although as yet but in its preliminary stage, and by the universality of its theater and the intensity of its action it will drum dialectics even into the heads of the mushroom upstarts of the new, Holy Prusso-German Empire.